Robert Mugabe, from liberator to tyrant. Most people knew him as the president who wouldn't let go of power even after ruling for 37 long years. Others know him as a savior who helped free Zimbabwe from British colonialism, imperialism, and white minority rule. He was the hero of the country, until he wasn't. His full name is Robert Gabriel Mugabe. He was born on 21st of February 1924 in Cozma, southern Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. The place came under the British rule at that point of time, and the region was under too much political stress because of this reason. Gabriel Matibli was his father. He was a carpenter. His mother, Bona, was from the Shuna ethnic group. He met his famous wife, Sally Hayfron, in Ghana for the first time and got married to her. However, he later got married to Grace Marufu, his wife, until his death. After Sally's death, of course. He had one son with Sally Hayfron, but he died at the age of 4. Now he has 2 sons and 1 daughter with Grace Marufu. Some sources also report that Mugabe's father went to South Africa to work at a Jesuit mission when Mugabe was still a little boy, but he never came back from there. The key to understanding Robert Mugabe is the fight against white minority rule. In the Rhodesia where he grew up, power was reserved for the 270,000 white people at the expense of about 6 million Africans. A host of other laws discriminated against the black majority, largely subsistence farmers. Many black farmers were pushed into marginal areas of the country during the colonial era. They were forced to leave their ancestral land and pushed into the country's peripheral regions with dry soil and low rainfall, while most fertile areas were reserved for the white farmers. Reclaiming the land was one of the main drivers behind the 1970s war, which brought Mr. Mugabe to power. After his father left, allegedly to be a missionary, his mother was left alone to raise Mugabe and his 3 other siblings on her own. Mugabe tried to help his mother by tending cows and doing odd jobs in his childhood. He had a special interest in education. He had his schooling under the guidance of the school director, Father Ohi. Luckily had a good influence in his childhood under the supervision of Ohi, who taught him to treat all people equally and directed him toward education fulfillment. His teachers used to often call him a clever child. He diligently finished his college education from Katuma's St. Francis Xavier College in the year 1945. He didn't lose his touch with the education sector as he chose the profession of a teacher and taught in Rhodesia and Ghana. He also pursued higher education at Fort Hare University in South Africa at the same time. In 1951, he graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in History and English from there. After that, he returned to his place to help locals with education. He decided to continue his education and earned the degree of Bachelor's of Education through the correspondence course in 1953 when he was in his hometown. As a child, Mr. Mugabe was said to have been a loner who spent much of his time reading. After his elder brother died of poisoning when Mugabe was just 10, his mother became depressed and the young Mugabe would do everything he could for her, to the extent that he started being teased at school as a mommy's boy. He eventually qualified as a teacher and in 1958 went to work in Ghana, which had just become the first African country south of the Sahara to end colonial rule. Encouraged by his wife from Ghana, Sally, and the Pan-Africanist speeches of Ghana's leader Kwame Nkrumah, Mugabe became determined to achieve the same back home. When he was in his hometown, he noticed the residents of South Rhodesia being pretty oppressed about the new rules and restrictions placed on their daily lives. And he discovered this in 1960 when he went home to introduce his fiancée. He saw there a drastic change in the place which left him quite disappointed. Despite having the possibility of making a great career, Mugabe chose to fight for his people and for his country's freedom. He was strictly against the fact that the British colonial government ruled out the black majority rule, and on his return in 1960, he started a campaign for an end to discrimination. Then he first agreed to address the crowd who assembled to protest against the arrest of their great leaders. He was quick to form a militant youth party to continue his movement. He wanted to help his local achieve black independence in Rhodesia, and he was jailed for a decade after being convicted of sedition, and the government discontinued the operation of the party at the end of 1961. 2 years after that, when Mugabe tried to develop an association called Zimbabwe African National Unit in 1963, he got himself arrested for aggressive protests against the British colonial government, and then it's when his imprisonment started for 10 years. While in prison, his supporters wrested control of ZANU, the biggest party fighting white rule, and installed him, even though in jail, as leader. While he was in prison, he continued his education and earned university degrees in economics, education, law and administration. He didn't lose his spirit during his days in prison. He engaged in the planning of guerrilla operations through secret communication while still being behind bars. He managed to leave the prison in 1974 and fled to southern Rhodesia. He started working on bringing together a troop of Rhodesian guerrilla trainees. On his release, he was supposed to remain in the country, but with the help of a white nun, he was smuggled over the border into Mozambique and the ZANU guerrilla camps. Under Mugabe's strong guidance and leadership, the battle against the British colonial government continued throughout the 1970s. British rule almost vanished in southern Rhodesia by the year 1980. After winning the government, he remained in power for 37 years, outlasting his greatest enemies and rivals such as Tony Blair, George W. Bush, Joshua Nkomo, Morgan Tsvangirai, and Nelson Mandela. As he destroyed the economic power of Zimbabwe's white community, which was based on their hold over the country's most fertile land, unfortunately, his compatriots, except for a small, well-connected elite, paid the price with the destruction of what had once been one of Africa's most diversified economies. After being awarded with the presidential position, Mugabe was quick to restructure and repair the country's broken economy. 1989 was the year of freedom, especially for the farmers, as they were given the opportunity to designate the price of their own crops. Under Mugabe's leadership, the growth in different sectors like farming, manufacturing, and mining became prominent by 1994. Zimbabwe, however, had to go through a little unrest due to factors like high inflation and Mugabe's denial to amend the one-party constitution present in Zimbabwe. He also won the 2002 presidential election, and despite Zimbabwe's deteriorating condition, widespread unemployment, rising cases of AIDS, and foreign debt, Mugabe was determined to protect his position. He was alleged to trigger violence and corruption nationwide to win the vote in 2005, and his opponents stood against the fact that Mugabe lavishly spent $250,000 to celebrate his birthday on February the 28th, 2009. Amid Zimbabwe's economic uncertainty. In the end, all of this came back to haunt him. The outpouring of joy of the streets of Harare, which greeted his forced resignation in November 2017, echoed the jubilation in the same city 37 years earlier when it was announced that he was the new leader of independent Zimbabwe. On the 14th of November 2017, armed military personnel from the Zimbabwe Defense Forces invaded the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation studios in Harare before Major General Sibusiso Moyo came out on a live television broadcast declaring that the army had activated an operation that would later be known as Operation Restore Legacy. Moyo stated that President Mugabe and his family would be safe and their security would be guaranteed, as the operation was only targeting criminals around him. What followed thereafter was a well-planned and carefully executed crackdown on members of a faction within the ruling ZANU-PF party known as G40. The Zimbabwe Republic Police and the General Intelligence Organization, both deemed loyal to the president, were neutralized by the army, which arrested some of their top leaders. On 21st of November 2017, facing all but certain impeachment, Mugabe resigned as president. Former Vice President Emerson Mnangagwa was sworn in as his replacement on 24th of November 2017. Although he was allowed to see out his days in peace in his Harare mansion, it was not the end he wanted, having famously boasted, "Only God who appointed me will remove me." Many Zimbabweans trace the reversal of his and their fortunes to his 1996 wedding to his secretary, Grace Marufu, following the death of his widely respected wife, Sally, in 1992. Sally was named the mother of the nation. He had an affair with Grace Marufu. The affair started in 1987. When she was 20, he was 61, so more than 3 times older. They got wed in 1996 when she was 32 and he was 73. Sally Mugabe was said to have been a moderating influence on her husband. Some Zimbabweans say things started going wrong when he married his young secretary, Grace, in 1996, calling her a gold digger, according to Wilf Mbanga, editor of the Zimbabwe newspaper, who used to be close personal friends with Mugabe. That sentiment was common long before anyone dreamed she might one day harbor presidential ambitions, which were the trigger for his close allies in the military and the ruling party to oust Mugabe from power. They were afraid his gold digger young wife would want to become president. Mugabe the man. While he was sometimes portrayed as a madman, this was far from the truth. He was extremely intelligent, and those who underestimated him usually discovered this to their cost. Stephen Chan, a professor at London School of Oriental and African Studies, noted Mr. Mugabe had repeatedly embarrassed the West with his adroit diplomacy. In his own words, "If you were my enemy, you are now my friend. If you hated me, you cannot avoid the love that binds me to you and you to me. After coming to power in 1980, Mugabe greatly expanded education and healthcare for black Zimbabweans, and the country enjoyed living standards far higher than its neighbors. In 1995, World Bank report praised Zimbabwe's rapid progress in the fields of health and literacy. Run by a former teacher, the country had highest literacy rates in Africa. Mugabe used to personally coach illiterate state house workers to help them pass exams. Still, Mugabe had many faces. 4 of them. Before the independence one, he was a very nice guy, he was not too sure of himself, there were very strong people in ZANU who were not afraid to oppose him, he never took a decision on his own. The 1980s, 1990s era, he did everything he could to improve the lives of his people. He wanted education for all, he wanted health for all, he introduced a leadership code limiting ZANU PF employees to 50 acres of land. The 1990s 2000 period was still a time when people worked harmoniously with him and discussed issues. He would let people have their way or reach a compromise. The last period, 2000 to 2017, after 2000 he started flexing his muscles. He brought in people who he could influence, several people were compromised, he held something over them. He has become fabulously wealthy, the change that started in 1996 being apparent from the year 2000. The man had an impressive CV. Education has always played the most important role in all of Mugabe's social policies, for which he has earned himself widespread recognition around the world while raising the literacy levels in Zimbabwe to an unparalleled 90%, the highest in all of Africa. Originally trained as a schoolteacher himself, he has also managed to gain a choice few university degrees in his own time, mainly while completing correspondence courses during his time spent in Salisbury prison. In total, he has 7 degrees, a Bachelor of Law and Masters of Laws from the University of London, like I said earlier, degrees in academic fields such as economics, education and administration. But on top of all his own merits, he was also awarded several honorary degrees as well as other official honors, many of which have since been revoked on the account of the human rights violations in Zimbabwe under his rule. Both the University of Massachusetts and Michigan State University in the United States withdrew Mugabe's honorary doctorates, as well as the University of Edinburgh in the UK. Even the Queen stripped him of his knighthood in 2008 after 14 years. He also was nominated for a Nobel Prize in 1981 after his election victory as Zimbabwe's first democratically elected president following the country's independence. He did still remain a devout Catholic, so much that he seemed to not care much about paper travel documentation. In 2013, with the inauguration of Pope Francis in Vatican Square, despite the fact that Mugabe was pretty much listed on every no-fly list in the Western world, and to his death he was not allowed to enter the European Union on account of hefty sanctions imposed on the Zimbabwean leader, he still somehow managed to sneak in and out of Italy on his way to the Vatican in order to witness the pontification of Francis. Citing religious reasons, he managed to subvert the ban and attend the ceremony like a true pilgrim of faith. He was also a lottery winner. In the year 2000, when Zimbabwe was barely managing to come out of its worst famine and 1 out of 2 Zimbabweans were suffering from continuous unemployment, Robert Mugabe's name was the one that was miraculously drawn by the national lottery in Zimbabwe, winning 100,000 Zimbabwean dollars, like $2,500. The entire country was surprised at the time, but with the lottery being drawn by the country's reserve bank and with many of its directors having direct ties to or careers in government, that surprise turned out to be short-lived. However, Mugabe's lucky win in the 2000 lottery was nothing compared to the lavish spending on his 90th birthday celebration, which is assumed to have run a total bill of over $40 million, pulled together from party funds, municipal money and donations. Before his death, Robert Mugabe planned to run as president. Again, he confirmed that he intended to run for office again in 2018, and if he would have survived that long, he would have been president for over 30 years, preceded by his 7-year stint as prime minister. Despite the fact that election fraud is believed to have been behind his most recent 2013 victory, with 61% of votes going to his ZANU-PF party, Mugabe seemed to be hopeful about the future, saying at his 90th birthday celebration that he felt as energetic as a 9-year-old boy. And in closing, to some, he was an evil dictator who should have ended his days in jail for crimes against humanity. To others, he was a hero who fought racial oppression and stood up to Western imperialism and neocolonialism. On his own words, he was an undoubted success. And that's all for today. Don't forget to share, like, subscribe. Tell me in the comment section below, have you ever been to Zimbabwe? Impoverishing your own state just to stay in power wasn't, of course, the way to go. If you live in Zimbabwe, tell me how's the weather like, how's the social political game these days, are you living well, fine and dandy, or not? That's all, I'm Alex, and until next time, beware of falling dictators and apples.